Right. Welcome everybody to, I don't know what day it is or how many of these we've done, to our latest iteration of our Zoom series. Today we have a very special guest, John Ferrer, who is a RedBar New York member, but also the founder and creator of Brew Watches. Also, I know Adam will say this too, pretty much the nicest person in the watch industry. So I know you all say that, but like we've met all of them. And so without further ado, Adam, if you want to add anything, I'm going to turn it over. We also have as a guest Ed Brill, who is a really good friend of mine. And
Ed.
Even in Chicago, even though I was technically a RedBar New York member because he has attended the New York chapter, but he is a collector of brew watches, so I wanted to have him on to tell his story. So with all of that said, I'll just hand it over to John and we can get started.
Well, no, I'm going to say, before you hand it over to John, shut up.
Not yet.
I have to, I honestly, I can't put too fine a point on this. And so I have to make an even finer point than the fine point that Kathleen made by saying that you are indeed probably the nicest guy in the business. We have pretty much met everyone. And this is what I think makes this statement have a little weight, is that for the most part, there are some really awesome, nice people in this business. And so somehow you seem to rise to the top of that.
Yeah, they're all pretty much,
but it's to a point where, like, is it creepy nice? No, you really thread that needle.
Yeah,
you know, it's such a fine line that, like, and I always joke, you know, it could be just one step further and you're inviting people to your basement and there's a well and a hose. And so I'm just saying, like, you do it. And I've met his parents, and they're, you know, they're great people who raised a great guy. So it's always been a pleasure. You've been a member of RedBar, you know, as far as I can remember. and so it's been wonderful to kind of know you this whole time. And then not only to know you, but then to you build this brand from scratch and based on just something you love. I mean, it's inspiring, I think, to a lot of people. So with that said, I will now shut up, and without further ado, the nicest man in the business.
Too much, Adam. First, thank you guys for doing this. As one small business owner, I could speak for everybody when I say, like, these highlights, these features, you know, even a small nod makes a huge difference these days. We're in an online world these days. We're not walking to retailers. So to give this nod and any positive shed of light makes a huge difference. And so thank you for that. And thanks for having me. You know, we could all be doing other things. So thanks for spending the time here today. That's a given. And, you know, what's really special, not just about Brew, but about RedBar is, you know, they coincided when I started Brew. It was when I was at RedBar. I was meeting with collectors. I was listening to them. I was taking feedback, good and bad. And, you know, I was kind of running in my own direction with my eyes and ears open from these collectors. And you say I'm the nicest person, and it's because I was around a good community that you guys have created. You know, you guys always did a very good job of bringing together positive, well-rounded people. And it wasn't one specific type of people. Yes, we could always talk about watches, but it was like a room of, like, really kind people. And Adam always had that great saying of, like, no dickheads and no assholes. And, you know, that's like a rule that goes on for forever. It's that simple, Adam. And, you know, whether it's an MB&F or a Timex, there was always, like, this equality of sharing and appreciating. And I think it was that no judgment, freedom to share and express what you loved in this watch industry, that at least it gave me the freedom to want to share. It encouraged me to speak with others, and I never felt any apprehension. And I think that gave me the freedom to talk to so many people. One, of course, in person, and then two, these online discussions and messaging. which just exponentially grew, excuse me. And, you know, this is year 5.5 for Brew now, 5.5 years.
Wow.
And
It's
Adam,
really been that
and
long.
Kathleen, you guys know, and every single day is like a lifetime because there's no wasted time. There's every minute you're spending time on the growth of the company, your relationships, making sure everybody's content, and you know, just not just checking off boxes, but doing what is necessary and what feels right. And so 5.5 years of just, it is in a blink of an eye. And you know, I'll tell you now, the most exciting thing is that it's grown past what I expected. And it's strange because I never thought of this as a business in the beginning. I always tell other designers that say, you know, what was your business plan? And I said, I just wanted to make a product, a watch, and share it and get a reaction and see how people enjoyed it. And I enjoy the experiences of people, you know, receiving a product, a watch in this case, and getting feedback. And so business, a plan was never in play. It was more of an experience, designing, and that was the process. That was the goal. And I think because there was like no far reach business mission, that it was authentic, it was real, and it was different because I wasn't looking at competitors in the same way that everybody else was, that this had to compete of checking off certain boxes in terms of design or materials. Of course, all those things were the standard, but I looked at this in terms of, you know, if I had to do this one time and had my own design philosophy, look, impression, perspective, all these things that make something special, what would that look like? And, you know, I'll tell you, as the years have gone on, 5.5 years, I feel more free and confident to continue designing in my own fashion. And it's exciting to see how people receive it. You can never please 100% of the people, and you should never have the expectation. But for the fragment of people that do receive the watch, enjoy the watch, and share it, that's the fuel of any brand. And any brand owner will always tell you that. It doesn't matter the price point or doesn't matter the product. It's the same receiving and enjoyment that fuels a brand owner, whether it's a small business or a big business. And I think a lot of people can attest to that. And that's what's been fueling this. And now it's, you know, I'll keep saying 5.5 years, it's in a blink of an eye. And you never stop learning. And I continue to challenge myself. We could talk about that in a little bit in terms of like design, manufacturing, delivery, the cost. You learn so much. And, you know, as time does go on, you do have to be more strategic. You can't just put out and not listen to the market. So constantly listening to feedback, but not letting it take me off of the course that I enjoy. I always say Max Busser gave me like really good advice, and it was at RedBar. And I asked him, I said, you know, what percentage of your watches do you listen to user feedback versus designing with just personal passion? He chuckled, you know, and he said, of course, the 100% personal passion, because if I ever delivered a product that people expected or asked for, then they would be designing it, not me. And, you know, at the end of the day, they follow my brand for the MB&F, for the creation of our thoughts and our perspectives. And we can't refrain from delivering our pure design creations. So that was kind of like, all right, if you're going to do it with your own perspective, and don't let people conflict your thoughts, because I see that happen a lot in the industry where people or specific brands might be tailoring to a specific need, and you know, that's okay in certain cases, but I always get more excitement when a brand just runs with their own gut and they do their own thing. It's a little different, and it's like a 50-50 split. That's okay. They find a way to work it out. And so that's Brew in a nutshell. We're just gonna run with this creative mission, and you know, we're kind of building a community of people that are interested in different, unique items. But that's my run on. So I don't want to talk the whole time.
No. Well, we do want you to talk the whole time. That's the point of this. We're just going to stand here and stare at you as you do that. I have a couple questions, and the first one is, obviously, brew. Where does this fascination come from? Why brew? Why this sort of caffeinated version of a watch company? And then also, and I'm just going to bring this up now so I don't forget it, I'm curious as to the journey. It's one thing for someone to sit and say, I'm going to create a watch company and I'm going to make a watch. It's an entirely different thing to actually do it. And I know a little bit of the process. I know a lot of the traveling that you've done back and forth. And so I'm curious if we have a little insight into that. But obviously, first, brew. What the hell?
Yeah. So about 8 years ago, when I was working for other watch brands, big and small, licensed brands for like Under Armour, Coleman, like Jessica Simpson, like they just sit in display boxes of like your Boscovs and JCPenney.
Okay, first of all, shout out for Boscovs.
Oh yeah, I mean, like
Binghamton is, my family's from upstate. Yeah. Okay, go on.
They're a good quick fix, and I learned a lot from those because they are like the mass market brands. They do tend to everyone that it's a super attainable product, whether it's watches or any other item. So I was designing watches for those guys and other people, but I didn't have a studio. I was a young kid just out of college, and so I was working in cafes. Cafes were like my studio, so to speak. So imagine going into the same exact cafe almost every single day. You walk in, they give you your coffee, you don't even say anything, you pay, you're at the table, and you work there for like 8 hours. And that was like my 9 to 5 in a way. And, over the course of about 2 to 3 years of just working in the cafes all the time, I was like, well, I want to do my own thing. I've designed watches for everybody else, but I feel like something's missing. I design watches and they ask for the same army or race car watch or space watch. But, does this person really believe in that? No, they're tending to like a specific need or demand in the market, and that's fine. And there will always be that. And, it's perfectly good. But I said, what if I was to do something myself that was personal for me, but also allowed other people to connect in a way that, something simple as a coffee is an experience in the day. It could be cliche, but maybe I can make it a little bit more tasteful. And so I was like, well, how could I put the cafe experience into a watch? Again, it's like a very far-fetched idea, but I kept going down that path. I said, well, the inspiration has to come somewhere as a designer. I took details from the espresso machines. I thought about the experience, even like a shot timer. And so it wasn't too on the nose. If you asked, it's always nice to have a support story of where things came from. But for the most part, any ordinary everyday person could put this on and enjoy it. And it wasn't too forward in their face as this is the coffee watch, you know what I mean? But
You're on mute, Adam.
Tom, running my mouth, and I was burping before, so I didn't want that to come through. So it's interesting. You had, well, obviously we see where the brew comes from, but you already had a background in terms of watch design on a certain level, and now is because of this you also had a little more insight into how a watch gets made, the process that you have to go through.
Yeah, that was the coolest part. That was the exciting part. That was why I even wanted to just make something just to make something. Like
yeah.
Any of us, we like to tinker. So when I was working for these guys freelancing, they would fly me like Switzerland or Italy or Asia, and they would say, we're going to the trade shows. Do you want to come visit? And at these trade shows, they're selling like CNC machines. They're showing you how like the stamping and die creation is made. It takes like 14 to 15 dies just to stamp out the case. I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. Again, you have to imagine the perspective of a kid that just came out of college. To have like your hands on a product like that is super cool. And then it got to the stage, and this was like the critical point where it flipped. And then I saw all these campaigns going on like Kickstarter, and I don't know if it was a mix of arrogance or like personal passion that just like, I said, I can do that. Why can't I do that? And I even remember walking into the room to my parents. I said, "Hey guys, there's this thing called Kickstarter, and I have this idea, and I want to put it out there. I'm not sure if it's going to work or not, but I just want to let you guys know that I'm going to do this." And they were always supportive. And they said, "Good luck, Jonathan. Hope it works out." And so I put it out. So I had all the contacts in order to make it. I loved the processes and I understood the processes. So it was a matter of making the prototypes, putting it out there, and just getting a feel. And it was so interesting because I had no idea of putting work out there and receiving feedback like that. There's no greater feedback than somebody putting their hard-earned money and purchasing a product of yours, an idea of yours. Like that's the ultimate testament of like their honest truth, is when somebody puts their money down and says, "I would like to purchase your artwork, your design, your product," versus, "I appreciate it." There's a difference there. So I said, holy cow, this is like ultimate confirmation to this. And then as the years go by, how do you evolve this? And thinking about the processes of manufacturing, how do I elevate the finishing? What kind of movements would I think about in the future? So it's been a lot of yes, I got into it because I was obsessed with the manufacturing, and I was obsessed even more when people were interested to see and receive these watches. Like there's no better feeling. And as the years go by, I look at different ways to increase the quality, and that quality comes from the case finishing, the way it looks and feels on your wrist. So the dimensions. Ed can talk about the original watch I made, the dimensions of that versus the retrograph today. I've chiseled it down over the years, and I did it in a way that I didn't want to lose thought on where it started. It always had to stay within the design ethos and the same design family visually too. So if you look at Ed's watch, which is like a 43 millimeter square watch versus the retrograph, which is like a 38 millimeter. And if you lay these across the table, you can see that they're within the same family in a way. And I always thought that was very important for any brand, is that I didn't want to make a Rolex move of just changing it onto a rubber strap and saying like, this is the new seasonal release. I wanted to have an exciting release for myself that I enjoyed. The ultimate testament is always, would I wear this? Would I buy this? And would I enjoy this over the years? And if that box was checked, I would feel more confident to release it. And the main question that comes into play is always, would I purchase this? And if you don't feel confident that you would go and purchase this watch, doesn't matter what price point, then it's not complete. There needs to be more refining, more thought. So there's a lot that goes into it, but we don't talk about it too often. It's mostly done behind the scenes, released, and then my job is to listen closely and read between the lines. What are people saying and what are they appreciating? Because sometimes people will love or hate something, but they don't know how to communicate that. So I always try to listen to these different points the countless people will make over the years, and then just like archive it while still staying with my own personal mission, running full force. So there's so many moving parts to it.
Which piece do you think was the most challenging for you to design and execute? Because you have a collection now. I mean, you're not some one-trick pony here.
Yeah, no, it's true. So I would say the retrograph, the one that you held up with the copper dial, was the most complicated because it's the busiest. So to have something that has so many, well, to be frank, so many lines and so many numbers packed onto a very small watch dial and still make it well balanced. Yeah, that was a really cool one. See, that's difficult. And that was something I experienced when I worked at these licensed brands. I'd walk into the room and I'd hand out these designs across their table. And then they would tell us, we love or hate these designs. You need to work on it, or this is good. but they could never tell us why. So we basically had to be like detectives. We would go back to our design tables and say like, okay, well, they didn't like design A, B, and C. Why do you think that they didn't like it? Was it the color? Was it the size? They said it was, you know, visually not digestible. Maybe it's too busy. So these are the things that I would think about, like the retrograph that has a lot packed onto it. And a little bit of a fear I had was, is it too busy? Some of these old vintage chronographs you see, they're just completely packed. But over the years, I've learned proportions are everything. So as long as the dial is balanced, and even though it can be, you know, very complicated looking, as long as it's balanced and the strap fits and the case is thin and, you know, there's something really beautiful about it, then it works. But then there's just so many plays of color, line, weight, even the fonts of the numerals that would also kind of point to a certain time period. So there's just so many different things. I would say the retrograph was the most difficult, and you know, it actually changed my business forever, I'd say, because
really,
so that was at year 3, and so my business, when I first launched Kickstarter in that first year, was like, it was a straight shot. And even my accountant looked, he's like, wow, this is unexpected for a business. He goes, you know, congrats. And then after that first year, because I wasn't with a big business plan, it really shot down. It slowed down because I wasn't ready with the next new release. I wasn't ready with, you know, your next runner up. Very slow. And now I know you need to have like a momentum curve. You can't just have a one-hit wonder that just comes out, because you'll plateau eventually. And so I did the first one, and then I started to think, oh my gosh, okay. And then I released the automatic watch, and that did good. However, the price point on that was very expensive, and it was a very new brand. So that also made it difficult. And then it came to year 3, and then it really started to sink, and I was going into the red. And my parents, they looked at me and they said, Jonathan, you should really rethink your vision on this, because, you know, we love you, we love your vision and everything, but, you know, you're not, it's not a global takeover. It's more of like a hobbyist business at this point. So rethink what you're doing. I said, okay. Well, I'm still working on the retrograph. And they're like, you should apply to Fossil and all these other places. And, you know, I'm like, yeah, sure. And I lied. I said I applied to all these watch companies. Well, I still worked on the retrograph because I was so obsessed with it. And now, mind you, to do a watch production can range anywhere from like $50,000 to $60,000 to develop a product that nobody has said that they're going to buy. So that's quite a gamble, especially when the odds are against you. You know, in terms of marketing and advertising, it's not Jonathan Ferrer reaching out to Condé Nast and saying, I have 100,000 for an editorial, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
So going against the grain, I said, all right, I'm going to do one last hurrah. I'm going to do the retrograph, and I'm going to put it out. And it changed my business forever. And there's a few things that I noticed about that. So if you looked at the graph, you know, first year is good, second year is slowed down, and it was like, Jonathan, make a decision. And I said, all right, I'm going to put everything on the table. And then it just shot up like a vertical shot, and it never slowed down. And I think it was a few things. I think the design was well received. I think the price point was just right. It was at $350. So it was kind of what I always wanted. It was an attainable watch. It was a watch that anybody could wear, pick up. It had like a unisex vibe to it. But it also had a lot of nostalgic qualities to it. I like that part where it's like one part unique and one part familiar. You don't see many cushion cases, and when you do, it's like a vintage 60s, 70s watch that it feels familiar. And so I think with that balance, that people received it and felt comfortable picking it up and wearing it and talking and sharing it. It was just, it did so well. And I said to myself, well, this is fantastic, and I'll continue to push this. But what's the next thing? Because I don't want to make the same mistake I made in the beginning, which is you're so excited, but by the end of the year, you should have your next design ready. and you can't be too obsessed with that, you know, that one hit wonder. So it's always working on the next one. And so I said, what if there was like a sportier version? And that's the Mastergraph that Kathleen's wearing right now. And so it's like staying within the same family, but that was like a triple register. And, you know, one of the things that Max Busser from MB&F also mentioned, he always says, when I release a design, sure, I'm excited, but my mind is already on the next one. And so what I've learned is I need to be so obsessed with these designs, but I can't be like oogling them for years on end. I need to think fast. And I don't think I've ever been this busy in my life where you're planning next year's design, but it takes such a long time to develop, and there's so many mistakes in terms of prototypes, colors, they all go wrong. Like if you care about the watch, there's so many things to fix. Sure, you can get like one prototype and be like, make it. But if you care about it and you know what you want, it takes so many iterations to get it right. It costs a lot to get it right. Because again, to get the tooling when you're ready for this, you're paying for 15 to 16 stainless steel dies. Very expensive. The time to CNC these things, getting the Pantone colors right. There's so many things that are involved. And I'm so glad that I didn't know all this at the beginning, because I would have been so scared away, I never would have done this. But now that I'm running so far into it, I feel paced now. I feel comfortable with this routine and pattern, just like any position, I'm sure, that I know what to look for. I know what the costs will be. I know what the lead times will be. I have a probable estimate of how many people may be interested to pick this up. So like any business, you want to have a gauge of where you want to be when you make a release. And now I'll tell you, it's still very unpredictable sometimes. Sometimes like artwork or some products, they do really well or they don't. It could be I hate when people blame the economy, but it could be so many different factors, because at the end of the day, we're human beings and we pick up things that, like watches, it's a very emotional purchase. And to predict the person's emotions, you know, I'm not a psychic reader, and it's very difficult. And you can only make assumptions so far. And however, I would still not steer away from taking risks, because if I was to do this, having your own brand is all about doing your own, sharing your own vision. To take a conservative move would kind of go against the pleasures of having a company. So sure, there is a market need and demand, but I think, even as Max said, it's always a good thought to harp on is, if you're going to do it with your own personal passion, because that's why people are following you in the first place. You know, people like to hear from you, Adam, because you have your unfiltered thoughts that are just going to come out whether you like it or not. And there's something to be said about that, you know?
Well, and that's why we have Kathleen, who helps me with that filter sometimes. Right. But, you know, it's so you were talking about, you know, responses and people, you know, you have to kind of understand who your market is and then design the pieces that resonate with you, but with a hope that that's going to resonate with them. And we've got someone here who clearly you have resonated with. And I think, you know, when Kathleen invited Ed on, it was, well, how did this happen? I mean, what is it about what this singularly nice individual does that appeals to you as a collector?
Yeah, so what's very interesting is I'm not even a coffee drinker. So the whole narrative around the coffee shop environment, while the story worked for me, it wasn't, you know, oh, this is going to speak to, well, you know, I mean, to each their own, right? It wasn't going to speak to, you know, my personal beverage choice, but the aesthetic was just so, the fact that it had that narrative resonated very, very clearly with me. And I loved the look of the watch that it's still, to me, every time I look at it, sorry, there's a little glare, but that it's this optical illusion that it's a square piece, but it's not, right? I mean, it looks rectangular a little bit. So it has this kind of funky vibe to it. And so the story and the fact that Jonathan was starting a business and was kickstarting it on his own, and that he was connected to RedBar, all of that like made me pay attention. At that point, I was like not really that much of a collector. I think I had 2 watches at that point, and this was the 3rd that I bought, and maybe I've bought 3 more since then. But I just was like, okay, price point's pretty solid. I can spend that as more of a whim than an investment, right? So I can say, all right, let's see what's going to happen here. And I got to say, and we'll tell the story of how I actually got the watch in a second, but I still get more compliments on this watch than any other that I wear. I was in a really high-end Bal Harbour, Florida boutique one day, watch boutique, and the guy's like, "What is that?" And I'm like, "Hey, you're selling $50,000 watches in here, and you're interested in this thing." I think I messaged Jonathan when I had that happen. It was a pretty amazing moment. So it's just it's an emotional piece. So yes, there's a story, and yes, there's some craftsmanship to it, and yes, the details are really amazing of what's done on the side, and the that it's a numbered piece. All of that is amazing, but it's an emotional feel kind of a watch. And I think also because there is a story. So I'm a Chicagoan, but have pretty regular reason to be in New York, which is how I know all of you at this point. And Kathleen knew I was going to be coming by, and she's like, "Hey, are you going to come to RedBar as long as you're in town Wednesday?" And I thought, yeah, of course, why not? It's either at a hotel room that night, so I could sit in a hotel room, or I could go hang out in the basement of a, in a bar. That sounds fine. So unbeknownst to me, she had coordinated with Jonathan, who had just gotten delivery of the watches from his manufacturer, to be there that night and to deliver the first watch, number 21, in person, which was just amazing, right? And I'm sure it's still on my Insta somewhere. So there's even more of a story that when I'm wearing it, it's not just that it's this cool watch with a narrative from a guy who designed it himself and kickstarted his business that way. It's that he brought it to me personally. So just lots and lots of feels connected to that watch. And I admit for this audience, I haven't yet bought any of the others in the line. Although the one you're planning on, I think right now with the teal face is pretty interesting, and the gray strap. I'm watching that one. And there's been one other that you started to do and then decided against doing, and I don't know whatever happened there. I was into that design, so if you ever bring that one back, maybe I'm in line for that. But I totally am hip to what Jonathan does. I follow all of this activity, and I think I've paid attention to a lot more small brand watches as a result ever since as well. So.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because I think I probably speak for a lot of RedBar New York members, especially that there's a lot of members who've purchased watches either because we know Jonathan and we know the story and we wanted to support, especially when the first watch came out. I know there's a whole bunch of people that bought multiple pieces from you, and then I think that the design language of your specific aesthetic carries through the whole line, and that design language resonates with a lot of people. I think also because it's fairly unique in the industry, right? So from a collector, even if you're kind of like Ed, where you've got a fairly small collection, or you're like me and Adam, who just can't like trip over watches when we're going through our closets or whatever, like no matter where you are on that spectrum, there are a lot of people who this appeals to specifically because it's unique. The lug design, I think is, Adam, correct me if you think I'm wrong here, but this kind of lug design is not seen, lugless design is not really common, that kind of thing. And so, and that design language is carried through from your first watch kind of all the way through the current pieces. So I think it's really nice to see how this, the aesthetic and, the pieces just kind of resonate with this broad swath of the collector community. Speaking of collectors, I have a question in the Q&A from Sam Lerner. He would like to know how it feels to have Alton Brown as a supporter, and wants to know how he found out about your brand, or sorry, he said your awesome brand. He'd like to know how he found out about it. I mean, that is probably your most, I guess your most famous collector, probably. So
I was going to bring that up too. So good call, Sam.
a little bit about
Let's
that.
put him on the spot. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the first time I actually heard from Alton Brown, I never reached out to him directly first. Everything happens at RedBar, I swear. I was sitting at the table, had a drink in my hand. I go, "Hey, Adam, guess who just commented on my Instagram?" He goes, "Who?"
I remember that. Holy shit.
I go, "Alton
And by the
Brown."
way, we have to preface this by saying too that if you're not aware, Alton Brown is a big watch collector. But you know, so I think on the one level, yes, of course, maybe he has his ear to the pavement, but still a guy at his level with a collection like that, and he knows about you was awesome. So I remember that. Eric, shut up, Greg. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, it's true. So, I mean, we mostly know about Alton Brown, the watch community, from his talking watches on Hodinkee. And he talks about his specific encounters with some of his vintage pieces, a piece from his father that he had lost over time, and he found it again. So everybody remembered Alton Brown as like this really big watch collector. But again, I never reached out to him. And my honest thought, I still don't know till this today, is I believe either one of the folks from Hodinkee or Eric Wind, who also is in the vintage watch world, must have made a slight mention to Alton Brown, because this is also a very niche community where somebody like Alton Brown could have simply said, you know, what's new and interesting these days? And it could have been somebody like Eric Wynn or somebody at Hodinkee that could have made a slight mention of Brew to him. And I honestly believe that's most likely what could have happened. I never followed up with Alton. Because also a person like that, you don't want to like, hey. You want to always give them their space and comfort. And the most ridiculous thing was, he ordered the watch, it gave him the same treatment, ordered it, packed it up and sent it to him just like everyone else. And then he wore it, followed up with me a month later and telling me that he really enjoyed it and that I should look out for it on the next Good Eats episodes on television. He goes, I like very, very, how do you say, nonchalant. I imagine you'll probably get a lot of attention on your brand. Just so you know, it's going to be on Good Eats on national television. And I'm over there like, I'm taking
That's
back.
awesome.
You know, he's an icon in the industry. Whether you're into cooking or not, you know about him. You've seen him before. And if you do follow cooking, he's big. He's been around for a very long time, and he's got his own character. He's very technical and savvy, comedic. But at the end of the day, he's a watch collector.
Yeah, he's well known, obviously, as a chef and as a watch collector. And he's also done some nice charity stuff recently too, involving his watch collection. But I still think it's just such an amazing story and a testament to what you do. You know, one thing that was interesting, and this was something Ed brought up, in terms of, you know, look, Kathleen got him to RedBar and talk to you, and you know, you personally hand over the watch. And so that's a wonderful thing about, I think, if you can have that story with a watch, a connection to the owner, or something that goes along with that. But that personal touch of yours, I've certainly experienced. I don't mean that you've personally touched me in places. We could talk about that.
That's a different
kind of personal touching. But with obviously both of my watches I got from you in person, but I still remember meeting you at a coffee shop to pick this watch up.
Yeah.
And it was something that it has nothing to do with me being me or Ed knowing us and being a part of this. It's you kind of, if you're around and someone's local, that's something you do.
Oh,
and you actually brought
like
tools to size the watch for me. And I remember we had some issues there. We had to get more links later and what have you. But it was really just a whole experience of like, here you go. And here I'm going to do that. And then of course I also have to, maybe you can speak a little bit to the story behind this particular watch, because you did a little work for me on it that nobody will really be able to see. It just looks like a normal black HP1, white hands and indexes. But what you can't see is that it's loomed. So they're not really supposed to be. And that was something I kind of wanted. And so you had some plans on how to do that. So, and then how it ultimately happened is very, to me, a very personal story.
Yeah, I would love for you to elaborate on that, Jonathan, but I also have a comment about an HP1 that is in Atom's collection that you also did customization work on. So tell us a little bit about the loom.
Yeah. So one of the golden rules I learned from Adam and the gang is like, no assholes. But another thing I learned over time through RedBar, I would say I learned a lot from a lot of the good folks, because when I come to drink, have good times, but at the end of the day, I like to handle the watches and I like to learn, not just about watches, but about people and what makes them happy and what continues to be like the positive energy. And one of the other main things I learned about the watch industry and life in general is to do things without expectations. So whether I'm working on a special dial or delivery, I do these things not like, oh, put me out there in that article, but it's just like, if I make this one person happy, then they're most likely going to wear this watch more often. Yeah, sure, they might make like a mention to their friend, but a watch is probably one of the most intimate things that you can ever like wear on your body. You wear it every day. It's on you, and this is like the one object you choose. Well, collectors have variety, but it's a very intimate object. So the way that that first impression stays with the watch forever. So I want that to be as good as possible. It sucks, if I ship something, I can't be there to put the flair or happiness into it, so to speak. But I do my best. But if there, like you said, if there's an opportunity for me to meet or do a little something, I can't sit at the bench doing the little hand loom dots. I'll get to that in a moment though. But I try as much as I can as one person. And even as things exceed past like my capabilities, I still try, or at least I look for a solution to make it feel as though there is a person, and it's true, that is considering all of these small details, because again, that first impression lasts with the watch forever. Otherwise, that watch will either get returned or sit in a junk drawer collecting dust, which I don't think is something that I would want to put all that energy and work into a product if it's just going to sit there. But one more thing about that watch that Adam has in particular is I was like, I'll get a watch of yours one day, but make sure it has loom. And half of that was kidding, half of that was like, no, like seriously, make it loom. And so I took that to heart. And I said, all right. And I was sourcing some guys in the city to do loom, and I reached out to them, got some quotes and some interest. And it was just like disastrous. Nobody wanted to touch the thing. I was like, all right, nobody wants to hand paint this. I understand why. They have real jobs to do. They don't want to paint. So I went online. I found like this Super Luminova mix, and I was looking up online how to mix it, the portions correctly, how to actually paint it, what brush do you need. And I was like, all right, Adam won't care if I mess up. Let me give this a shot. And I went through like a dozen dials until I got it correct. And even still, I would say it's like 98% there. There's subtle imperfections if you take a loop system to it, and that's kind of what's cool.
I was going to say that's what made it. Yeah. And just again, you were so apologetic about the time and the process and everything that happened. And there's Greg again. And no, folks, let's be clear. It is not perfect. His job is not going to be to reloom dials for you. And
No.
And to me, that's what makes it awesome. I know, and look, I don't want everybody coming at you now and saying, "Hey, loom my dials." But to me, it was just part of everything that makes you, and what makes the watch special. And this actually ties into something else I had a question about. You've done a couple of collaborations.
Mm-hmm.
I have to say the watch that you did with Worn and Wound guys with the dial, the concentric, that HP wanted. And by the way, those guys are killing it with their LEs. It's fantastic. But this was an interesting one. And I wanted to ask about what it was like to work with King Nerd, AKA or Johnny Dowling. And this, you can see this, it's a hand engraved cup of coffee, a brew, naturally. And how many of these did you do?
So we did 4 of those. I think you got the last one. They sold out in 20 minutes, but again, 4 watches, and we're projecting into the entire watch industry.
And well, what was that process like? I mean, did he approach you? Did you approach him?
Yeah, similar to a lot of engagements on Instagram, you follow each other and you appreciate each other's work and you give a little comment here and there. And it must have been a year after following each other. He goes, "Hey, John, love what you're doing. Would you be interested?" He approached me. Would you be interested in doing a little collaboration? And I said, "Yeah, absolutely. What do you have in mind?" He's like, I know you do the whole coffee thing. I had this idea. And he came to me and he showed me these really awesome sketches, all hand sketches. He emailed me those and I said, "That's super cool. I'll make some blank watches and we'll put it on." We're like, "Which color watch should we use?" Well, he's like, I'm actually going to use like 20, that's like real 24 karat gold that he laid over the coffee. He's like, "I'll do the gold. So let's use the copper gold watches for this." That's perfect. And he was so pleasant to work with because not only did he do like a bang up job on executing it, really pleasant during the process, but this is the telltale when you know it's a good person. Even after they were sold and everything was good, the relationship with him was even stronger after. And it wasn't about money. It was just like, "Hey bro, how are you?" Like, "Hey bro, I'm so glad we did that. We got to do something again in the future." And it's not like we made out like bandits. It's kind of like we basically broke even. But it was a cool project that we got to like cross promote in a way. I share a little of his work, he shares mine, and we had fun doing it. And it's good people like that also that keep the positive energy flowing in the industry, keep positive, exciting news in the industry. And so I would put him on like the top bar of like good people to collaborate and just to speak with in general. He's a really smart, good guy.
Well, you're in good company, though. That's interesting. He reached out to you. And so if people who are not aware, he's a master engraver, young fellow, by the way, but he's done pieces for her work. He recently did a custom collaboration with Phil Toledano, or Mr. Enthusiast, a very psycho kind of reinterpretation of a Rolex Mariner. And I love the fact, though, that he actually approached you for that project.
Yeah, I was also, I don't like to say surprised, but sometimes you are taken back because I did look at his work, and to work with brands like Rolex or work, did he do, no, not MB&F, but some of like the most high-end independent brands. And he reached out to me and he goes, and he's going to let me know like how much it costs. I'm like, "Oh, before you give me the cost, just so you know, I'm just one person." He goes, "Oh, okay. Just didn't want him to think I was like," because sometimes the assumption is that, and it's perfectly fine, that Brew Watches is a team. And, I'll never say no to that because I actually think of every person that either buys the watch, supports, talks about it, any advice or suggestions that you give to me, like you're indirectly on the team. Like you're helping and supporting the same mission that I'm doing. Whether I can put you on salary, I don't know, but it's like it's a bond that I would never take for granted. So I'll tell you, even like a subtle mention, it's like, I really don't take that for granted these days, because people's word is like very, very, people's confidence comes not from me saying that this is the best, coolest watch. They want to hear from real people that are on the other side that received this. It's like, there's no bias. It's, did you like it? Yes or no? And what did you like about it? And what was your experience like? And my word is only so good. It only goes so far.
Right. We have another question in the Q&A from Paul. He'd like to know, and this goes kind of back to what we were talking about earlier from design. He'd like to know if you could speak to the lessons and challenges you've had with bracelet design, specifically He calls out the HP1, but he said he thinks many of us forget the work involved there in addition to all the case design work. So can you talk a little bit about your bracelet designs?
Yeah, bracelets are really complicated because there's a few things. That's something, it's different for every watch because it's a dimension game. You have to know where that sits on the wrist. So understanding how much room your case is going to take on the wrist. So for instance, the retrograph, I know that this watch is 41.5 millimeters long, so 41.5 across the wrist. Now, how much wiggle room or how much flexibility do I have until that cuts down across the wrist? Because that determines my first link, which also determines every remaining link after that. So the number one priority is, yeah, you want to look good, but if it doesn't fit flexible across the wrist and comfortable, then it defeats the whole purpose of even producing a bracelet. Just keep it on a leather strap. So that's the first obstacle, is like figuring out your dimensions correctly. And the next challenge would be, well, I usually work with a butterfly deployant. So it basically comes flush fit and just snaps down. Depending on the link length, you have to figure out where they end over that butterfly, because that's basically a standard butterfly. And if they don't sit well across that, then it's going to sit wonky underneath your wrist. So comfort's a big thing. And that's one of those challenges that people will either like or dislike your product and not know why. That's something they might just be doing this all day, and it's like, it's unconsciously uncomfortable, but they don't realize it, and they might not wear their watch more because of that. So as long as that is complete, knowing the dimensions, also thickness of a bracelet, it's another big part. Some people prefer watches that are lighter or heavier. I've noticed through my experience, older folks usually like watches that are a little bit lighter. It could be a titanium watch or a watch that's just not too heavy. In general, it's a stainless steel watch. So if I have a very thick 3 millimeter bracelet that's stainless steel over a stainless steel watch with an automatic movement, all these things add up to the weight. And if it's to a market that might be for older man or woman, that might lead to them. I've actually had people that had the HP1 that were older, and they returned it because they said the weight was just too much for them. So something I never considered until I experienced it, and I'm glad that I had those experiences, so now I know. And you'll actually see vintage watches have like really thin, fragile stainless steel bracelets that work really well for some of the older folks. So something to take into consideration. So right now I'm working on a bracelet design for my next version. And I could have done like a 3 millimeter, and it would have felt like this nice, robust, heavy bracelet. And people's perception is always heft or heaviness equals quality or value. However, I don't think that's the case. I would put comfort first. And so now I tapered that from a 3 to a 2.25, and it's a small difference, but it makes a huge difference in weight and flex. So sometimes also when you make, it depends on the design, of course. If you make your links a little bit thinner, it actually allows more flexibility, which equals comfort in this case. So you have the comfort of the flex, the weight, and as long as it's well finished and well constructed, because it's all held together by pins, so you have to make sure everything is compressed and finished correctly, then you have like a really solid bracelet. However, I won't pretend to be like the professional bracelet manufacturer or designer, but these are definitely the things that I would personally consider when I work on the bracelets.
Okay, thank you so much for that. We're coming very close to the top of the hour, so do any of the panelists have anything else to add, or any other questions for John?
I just, have this vision of you like sitting at your bedside in your underwear with like a loom brush, just like, Jesus Christ, this sucks. Why would he, God damn it. All right, fine. We're just going to get this done. And that's how I want to imagine it. So that every time I look at it, especially in the dark, I think about you and your underwear. I know that's not how it happened, but I just, you know, sometimes we like to romanticize these things a little bit.
I won't deny it, Adam.
You're going to let me have this fantasy. This is why you're the nicest guy in the business.
But you know what? If I had to put a final thought on this, what I would say is, excuse me, up till now, it has been an extremely personal journey, and I have made an extremely attainable watch. And I never want to forget my roots, especially every person that I've grown with and every person that's made every bit of support over the years. But what's really exciting now is I've learned so much in terms of design, movements, manufacturing, and my vision has never been clearer in terms of who I am in terms of a brand and company and my design philosophy. All that being said, I will still always be Jonathan Ferrer of Brew, but it's like now I'm flicking the switch on what would the most elevated brew look like in the future while still keeping like the design ethos the same. So, you know, I always say like let's raise the stakes a little bit, because if there is an audience, and I've noticed that over the years, and they are interested, why not go like full unfiltered, you know, Jonathan Ferrer design philosophy on the brew, and what would that look like? And everything from even the movement, so like more mechanical movements in the future. And the most difficult part is like making it attainable, right? So I don't want to dismiss any audience member, because I also, part of my vision is having an audience that will grow with me over the years. You know, a person that did a really good job and that I've always really appreciated his work, Bradley Price from Autodromo. He started with watches that were like in the $400 or $500 quartz realm, and he always kept his design very distinct for his automotive racing. So over the years, you know, he progressively increased his prices and his movements and his designs and packaging and branding, and it was always very refined, and it was more elevated over the years. And not to say that design has to be my process, but the philosophy that you can elevate your brand, the product, and do it in a way that will grow with your audience. Not produce a $2,000 watch all of a sudden and then leave them all behind, but progressively over the years. And what I notice about that is they're noticing the details more. They're appreciating the movement or the finishing more. And so it's just like educating and showing my audience things over time and elevating it, if that makes sense. And so that's kind of like what I'm working on now, is how do I continue to elevate it, but not dismiss my members of my audience that have been there since the very beginning. So
works for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
I know we're getting towards the end here, but maybe one last thing, if you can just give us a holler. You know, Ed mentioned about your upcoming new dial for the retrograph. Do you know when that's going to drop? Or I've seen some other people talking about this.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that was
gorgeous.
A whirlwind. Again, unexpected. I didn't expect that to go over like it did. So I should have everything complete in 2 weeks. So I'm personally quality controlling everything right now. Website was a little iffy when I launched that, but 2 weeks we should be all set and ready for that. And
all right,
so that's around the corner.
Nice.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to it because I really like that one. Obviously, I messaged you about it, I think, right away as soon as it appeared on the.
Yes, you did.
Yeah. So great. Thank you so much for joining us. We're looking forward to seeing that watch when it comes out. Save one for me. And and thank you everybody for your time, and thank you to all the attendees that joined us and for your great questions and conversation, including someone saying, of course, Adam is imagining John in his underwear on his bed. It's unsurprising, but thank you everybody, and this will be on our YouTube channel tomorrow. And
then one last thing, say hi to your parents for me.
Yeah,
I will.
All right, thank you, John, and be safe.
Bye.
Thanks for having me.
Take care, Ed.